Hello, I'm Diane Leslie, and I'm here to welcome you to Diesel, a bookstore. When the information broke, I guess I saw it in the New York Times about I don't even know what to call it, the Madoff debacle, the Madoff scandal. It was so shocking and so fascinating. And I don't think since Watergate was I rushing to get the paper every day to read the next episode of what had happened. So as the story unfolded, I was thinking, well, this is like a Greek tragedy. This is amazing, and if only we had Aeschylus here to write about it. And then later on, as we got more and more information and the victims, we started seeing what happened to some of the people who invested with the Madoffs. I started thinking, no, Shakespeare should have done this. Only Shakespeare could write this fully. Well, now, sometime later, 3 years later, here we are, and I came across Laurie Sandell's book. And I want to say that it's utterly fascinating. I mean, we thought we knew everything, but we didn't. And just reading about the family and finding out that even though Bernie Madoff is kind of absent from the book because you didn't interview him, but at least I, as a reader, I will say, I realized this man was a bully, and he bullied his wife and sons. And so they got to the point that they were afraid to ask him questions. They certainly never, he didn't answer their questions. And so there's a whole psychological element that Laurie managed to get into this book that just was never in the newspapers. And I want to say that I think the Madoff family was incredibly lucky to pick Laurie Sandell because of all the possible journalists who could have written this book. She is the best, because she herself grew up with a con man in her life. So I now present to you someone who really knows what she's talking about, Laurie Sandell.
Thank you so much for that very generous and wonderful introduction, and thank you, Diesel, a bookstore, for having me today. I just want to tell you a little bit about how this book came to be, and then I'm going to read a chapter from the book. In 2009, September of 2009, a book that I had written called The Imposter's Daughter about my own father and his cons and his deceptions came out. And I was reading from it at a bookstore, much like this one, and backstage signing books, a woman approached me and said, I can't believe you're here, I can't believe your story, and introduced herself as the fiancée of Andrew Madoff. That, of course, my jaw dropped. This was a year after the scandal, and it was completely just mind-blowing, and I'd been following it like everybody else. And I came to know the family over the course of 2 years. Like so many people that had been following the story, I, of course, thought that Andrew was most likely involved, that he and his brother had known all about his father's fraud. I was convinced that Ruth had to have known, and it was only really prurient curiosity that sort of brought me into this story. I was a journalist, and I wanted to get to the truth of this story like every other journalist out there and most of the people in the public. And so when I was, when it came time that they were ready to write a book and I sat down with them and was taken into the heart of their story, I was absolutely astonished to find that nothing I thought I knew was true. So I'm just going to read to you from the chapter of the confession itself. And there we'll go. The confession. By 6:50 a.m., Andrew and Mark were, once again, perched in the conference room behind the trading floor. They shot each other tense, worried looks, periodically breaking the silence to speculate or to offer a new theory. One thing they knew, something was terribly wrong. By 8 a.m., Peter still hadn't arrived. Mark shook his head. Let's wait at our desks. Ruth, according to court filings, had taken out some $15 million in 2 separate withdrawals from her Comad brokerage account in the prior 3 weeks. Bernie had asked her to move the money into her Wachovia bank account so he could use it to cover redemptions. She did his bidding unquestioningly, something that the media claimed as proof of her involvement. But then, the family moved millions of dollars around all the time, buying boats and apartments, making large wire transfers and multi-million-dollar donations to philanthropic organizations. Had Ruth questioned Bernie's directive, Andrew says, Bernie would have barked at her, and that would have been the end of the conversation. It wasn't until 9:20 a.m. that Andrew spotted Peter making his way across the trading floor. Peter is Bernie's brother. He signaled to Mark, and they hurried into the conference room. As Andrew took his seat, he felt the back of his neck grow hot with anticipation. Peter stood by the door, his mouth a grim line. I talked to your father. It's bad. He wants to talk to you himself, he said. Andrew's stomach dropped. He knew that his uncle tended to put a positive spin on things. The brothers pushed their chairs back and followed their uncle onto the trading floor. They passed their colleagues, shouting orders at their desks, a row of administrative offices, a cluster of secretaries, a large conference room. The walk seemed to take forever. When they arrived at Bernie's glass-walled executive office, they found him sitting behind his desk, leaning back in his chair, staring at a television set mounted on the ceiling. He didn't greet them or even acknowledge their arrival. Andrew and Peter took the 2 chairs facing Bernie. Mark sat on a couch to the left of his desk. For a few minutes, the 4 sat in tense silence. I don't know where to start, Bernie finally began. His voice caught in his throat and tears started to well up in his eyes. Andrew felt a river of alarm rise through his chest. He glanced at Mark. He was studying Bernie intensely. Let's not do this right at your main desk, Peter suggested. Let's move to the table in the corner. The 4 gathered around a small conference table at the far end of the room, where a wall offered a shade more privacy. Again, Bernie started to talk and couldn't continue. Dumbfounded, Andrew watched his father struggle for words. I can't do this here, Bernie finally said. Andrew looked at his father, feeling as though he had entered, quote, the world of the surreal. What could possibly be so bad that he couldn't even discuss it at the office? Why don't we go to your apartment, Andrew suggested. Are we all going up there? Mark asked. Bernie cleared his throat. No. Peter, you stay here and run the show while we go up to the apartment. Peter nodded and left the office. The coat closet was right outside Bernie's office. As the 3 struggled into their winter gear, Bernie said to his secretary, Eleanor, have Lee bring the car around. Where the hell are you going? The market is open, Eleanor joked, liking to bust her boss's chops from time to time. Mind your own business, Bernie snapped, immediately silencing Eleanor, who stared at her computer. Andrew, Mark, and Bernie rode the elevator down in silence, then waited for Lee in the vast lobby of the Lipstick Building, watching the rain streak across the revolving doors. There was no small talk. Andrew tried to blend into his surroundings, wishing he could be teleported to his parents' apartment so he could get whatever was going to happen over with. The anticipation was unbearable. The car pulled up front, driven by Clive, not Lee. Again, they rode in silence. Bernie sandwiched between his 2 sons in the back seat, misty-eyed and shaken, struggling to hold it together, as though he'd already received bad news and was trying to cope with it, Andrew says. Andrew stared out the window at the early Christmas shoppers, his brain a dead zone. Clive dropped them off on 64th Street, in front of the entrance to Ruth and Bernie's penthouse apartment. The 3 rode up to the 11th floor entrance, then removed their wet shoes in the foyer, obeying Bernie's shoes-off rule. They laid their coats across the banister of the staircase, taking care not to drip water onto the floor. Ruth greeted them at the door, her face grim. She, too, had no idea why her husband had rushed home in the middle of the day to talk to his family, but, like her sons, she suspected the news was bad, somehow connected to the mayhem on Wall Street. Bernie had called her from the office and said, I have something to tell you. I can't tell you on the phone. I'm coming home with the boys. She'd gotten off the phone, shaking, and had waited for them in the kitchen. Together, the family entered the sitting room, a forbidding room that Andrew had never liked, with dark green walls, khaki carpeting, dark leather club chairs, and a heavy desk. Bernie sat by himself on a large leather sofa. Ruth sat on a club chair next to the couch. Andrew took the ottoman and Mark the desk chair. The 4 faced one another, sitting a considerable distance apart. I don't know where to start, Bernie began again. He started to sob. The firm is insolvent. I'm broke. How is that possible? Andrew asked. I don't understand. The money is gone. It's over. I don't understand, Andrew repeated. How can that be? We're having an okay year. What happened? Is this about the redemptions? Then Bernie said something more terrible than they could have imagined. It's all been one big lie.